Kirk, Uhura, and Chekov are preparing to beam off ship when they suddenly disappear from the transport pad. Not like they're beamed away, they just vanish. They reappear in some kind of arena surrounded by a high fence. A collection of odd-looking people in fetish gear surround them and immediately capture them. The guy in charge of them, Bald Dracula, introduces himself as Galt, and then the Enterprise trio are then chained up and fitted with control collars. Damn, who wrote this? Margaret, Armen, you are one kinky motherfucker. Galt, who really needs some lotion, he's looking pretty flaky, informs Kirk, Uhura, and Chekov that they were brought here to the planet of Triskelion by the Providers to make them into slaves and force them to fight in their gladiator games for their amusement forever. So basically it's like the Hunger Games, but everyone is wearing stupid outfits. Kirk is like, you can't do this to me, I'm an American citizen, and Galt is like, I don't give a f***. They try to make a break for it, but they are quickly incapacitated by their collars. It's not gonna be that easy. Back on the ship, Spock, Bones, and Scotty are trying desperately to figure out what happened to their shipmates, since there's no sign of them on the planet below. This is going to be one of those Kirk is gone, so Spock and McCoy have to try to get along with each other episodes. On Triskelion, Kirk, Uhura, and Chekov are discussing how they're going to get out of this one when one of the other thralls, we'll call him Blonde Elvis, comes into Uhura's cell, introduces himself as her handler, and tries to... while Kirk and Chekov have to listen to the whole thing, but Uhura puts up a fight and luckily Blonde Elvis backs off. The other two, Fluttershy and Lady Gaga, bring Chekov and Kirk food. Fluttershy puts the moves on Chekov, and since she's got a deep voice and muscles, Chekov is naturally grossed out. So we've got attempted sexual assault and transphobia, and we're only 15 minutes in. Ooh boy. Meanwhile, Kirk flirts with his own handler, Lady Gaga, while wheedling some information out of her. Here we have another instance of Kirk using his charm as a disarming tactic, the old homme fatale routine. Then their training begins outside, and Galt informs them that they have to use a fellow thrall as a target practice. Jesus Christ, this episode is uncomfortable. I'm not even sure it's my place to talk about the racial subtext of this scene. I mean, that guy has a whip and everything. Uhura, Kirk, and Chekov refuse to beat another person, so Kirk takes the punishment for their insubordination. He puts up a good fight, however, thanks to a tip from Lady Gaga, and he, Uhura, and Chekov are bought by one of the Providers, who remain unseen. Back on the ship, the Enterprise has discovered a faint ionization trace, and Spock decides to follow it to a planet nearly a dozen light years away. Bones and Scotty think it's impossible that the three could have been transported that far, but Spock is like, do y'all have any better ideas? And Bones and Scotty don't. So away they go. Lady Gaga takes Kirk on a jog, and of course Kirk is now shirtless. If this sandy, rocky area looks familiar, it's because it's a reused set from the Man Trap, all the way back in the first episode. Kirk asks Shahna more questions about the Providers and this place, and Shahna doesn't know much of anything, having been born into thraldom, raised only to fight and serve the Providers. She basically has the brain of a child. Kirk gets flirty again, because what's more attractive than a woman who's easy to manipulate? And then when he tries again to get information about the Providers, Shahna's collar activates and the Providers punish her, much like how the Keepers punished Vina for revealing too much to Pike in the menagerie. Kirk, to his credit, pleads with the Providers that he's the one who should be punished, not Shahna. Shahna is surprised that Kirk would do something like that for her, as no one has ever shown her compassion, and he kisses her.
Is this also helping?
You could call it that.
Please, help me once again.
Okay, we're gonna come back to this one. Suffice it to say, they get caught and sent back to their cells. Shahna brings Kirk his dinner, and she expresses that she feels confusion from what happened between them. Kirk kisses her again, and then promptly knocks her out. Listen, despite what you may have thought from the Friday's Child episode, my issue is not men cannot hit women ever. I thought I made myself clear, but there was confusion in the comments, so let me set the record straight. Bones slapped Catwoman because she slapped him first. In a vacuum, that's fair. You're not wrong for hitting someone in self-defense, no matter the gender. Abuse of men at the hands of women is still abuse. The thing is, he was already touching her against her consent before she slapped him, which is why she did it. You may think he had the right to touch her because she was pregnant and he was trying to examine her, but here's the thing. Doctors especially have to respect their patients' consent. It's one of the core tenets of the healthcare profession. It says on the website for the National Library of Medicine verbatim, consent is both an ethical and legal obligation of medical practitioners and originates from the patient's right to direct what happens to their body. So Bones was in the wrong, not for slapping a woman, for violating his patient's consent. A doctor can't force care on someone, even if it's probably what's best for them. Now in this case, I think Kirk is right to hit Shahna. Shahna may not be one of the providers who are responsible for his enslavement, but she is an instrument in it. I think it's unfair that this clip gets used out of context a lot as proof that Kirk is a brute who misuses women. Shahna is working with his oppressor. Maybe unwillingly, she is after all just as captive as Kirk, which is why I think he apologizes to her for knocking her out cold. He realizes this isn't her fault and he genuinely feels sorry for her, but she's still a participant. This is self-defense. Kirk breaks himself, Uhura, and Chekov out, but they're unfortunately caught by Bald Dracula and the disembodied voices of the providers. Then, the Enterprise finally arrives at Triskelion, and the providers disable all the Enterprise's controls. Kirk double-dog dares the providers to show themselves at last, and the providers are revealed to be 3 brains sitting under a glass dome, deep, deep under the planet's surface. The brains explain that after eons of intellectual pursuit, they've evolved past the need for physical bodies. Kirk asks why such an advanced species wastes their time watching gladiator fights, and they tell him that after all this time, watching the fights and making wagers on them are the only things that bring them any amusement. After the brains tell Kirk they're going to destroy the Enterprise and its crew, Kirk makes a bet with them that if he fights 3 thralls in the arena by himself and wins, the brains must let him and the Enterprise and all the thralls go. The brains, unable to resist a wager, agree. In the arena, Kirk fights the Neanderthal, Blonde Elvis, and an Andorian, and holds his own pretty well. The Neanderthal and Blonde Elvis get taken out, but the Andorian is merely knocked out. So Shahna is subbed in for him. Now, Kirk has to fight someone he actually cares about. Shauna's a bit pissed about Kirk knocking her out earlier, realizing he's been manipulating her, and it's clear she's not going to take it easy on him. They're pretty evenly matched, but Kirk eventually gets the upper hand, and she surrenders. The brains hold up their end of the deal and release all the thralls. Kirk apologizes to Shahna, and she's like, you know what? I get it. You did what you had to do. We're square. Shahna wants to go with Kirk, but Kirk is like, sorry baby, you have a civilization to build, and leaves with one last kiss. The episode ends with Shahna gazing up at the stars, now with a new sense of wonder, freedom, and hope. Angelique Pettyjohn, who played Shahna, has kind of a sad story. While trying to make her name in the film industry, she fell into addiction problems and ended up doing adult films to get by. Of course, there's nothing shameful about being a porn actor. Sex work deserves as much respect as any other profession. But it's sad that Pettyjohn fell in such hard times and never got to realize her dreams as a movie star. But thankfully, Star Trek was able to help her financially, as she was able to make money from making appearances at sci-fi conventions. She sadly died from cancer in 1992 at the age of 48. Galt is played by Joseph Ruskin in his first role in the Star Trek universe. While this is his only TOS episode, he would go on to make several more appearances in the future on Deep Space Nine, Voyager, and Enterprise, as well as the 9th Star Trek feature film Insurrection. He also famously provided the voiceover for the Canomite aliens in the landmark Twilight Zone episode To Serve Man. Boy, this episode is such a mishmash. It's almost whiplash-inducing in how it switches from bad to good to bad to good. So let's get the positives out of the way. I really do like Shahna. Despite being an archetypal Star Trek hot babe of the week and having the mind of a toddler, Pettyjohn actually manages to bring some depth to her. Shahna comes off as someone who's just trying to survive, and it's not her fault that the overlords of her society have incapacitated her intelligence. It seems like she has potential to develop and grow, and I think knowing Kirk inspired her to better herself and this new world she's going to help build. I also like the pacing of the episode. It never goes too fast or gets stagnate. It holds your attention all the way through. Also, Shatner's fight scenes are actually really good. They're goofy as always, but they work better in this episode. Maybe that's because they actually let Shatner do his own stunts in this one. Shatner is kind of like a human pinball when filming a fight, bouncing off everything. And this maneuver where he actually uses his bindings as a weapon is genius. You know I love it when Kirk gets to show off how clever he is. Okay, that's it. That's all I got. Now for the awful. I think I'd actually enjoy this episode if it weren't for the problematic elements. The scene where Blonde Elvis tries to rape Uhura feels completely unnecessary. Yes, it's grounded in what happens to actual slaves, but the tone of the episode is otherwise so silly, so it doesn't really fit. And then of course there's the racist stuff, which I don't feel like it's my place to address since I'm a Whitey McWhiterson, which is why I reached out to my friend and fellow creator Bothered Boy and asked him to weigh in on the episode.
Hi Bother Brigade, here's what's bothering me today. This Star Trek episode. Alright, couple things here before we all lace up our yikes and run away. This episode is very problematic to me for a number of reasons. And hopefully Ren has already done the content warnings because, yeah, there's a lot of really nasty stuff in here. So the first thing about this episode that stood out to me was the implied forced breeding of Uhura in like the first few minutes of the episode. So, yeah, that was pretty awful. But unfortunately, that is something that used to happen regularly to slaves in the US, Canada, Brazil, wherever there was slavery. People always thought, oh, hey, here's a human that I have dehumanized and I want more of the humans. And oh, this one's very strong and this one appears to be good breeding stock. That is literally how they referred to black women back in the day when it came to this stuff. And then they would force them to breed together to produce more progeny who could, do all the hard work that all the hardworking white folk really wanted to do. And that's also kind of circling back around part of the problem that I have with this episode, because it is chock full of white saviorism. And it really just kind of shows and comes across. I know it's part of just, the time that this was made in. It was like the 60s. And yeah, it was like, oh yeah, black people totally deserve equal rights. But what that really means, I don't know. And we're still pretty racist in a whole ton of ways. And that to me very much comes across in this video because there are several instances, right, where you have people who can very easily identify what the core messages are supposed to be. Oh, thralls, well, we have another word for that. That's slavery. And so it's whole, slavery bad, right? And what they're doing to Uhura, the black woman, that's just so terrible. Don't you want to humanize and identify with the poor black people in this? Bring out the black men to be flogged. Yeah, we know this is all bad stuff to do to black people, right? That's the kind of implication of, what you're supposed to feel when watching this, which statistically as a kid, you were probably white watching this. And so it's like, yeah, okay. And then there's the rest of the story and how a lot of the kind of like side elements leave a lot more questions than answers. So Kirk, wagers everything on a gamble. He wins because of course he does. And it's all about how they're going to make everything proper for the thralls. They're going to free the thralls, and then they're going to raise them up and train them in a proper society. I wonder where I've heard that before in history. Does it have anything at all to do with the historic idea of the white civilizing mission? The poor indigenous people of the Americas, the poor black people of Africa, the poor Asians over in Asia. They just haven't figured out civilization and industrialism yet. We just gotta help the poor things while also spreading Christianity. Don't you, it's my burden to bear, don't you know? I'm just like Jesus for doing this crap. All that kind of nonsense, right? And that comes across so clearly to me in this episode. It's Kirk who actually, saves the thralls, when really, when you think about it, retroactively speaking, it would have been far better for Uhura to do that, right? But no, can't have that just yet. And then the way he frees them is just weird. Like, oh yeah, you're totally going to honor your bargain, right? Like there's no stakes for them to actually do that. And then, oh no, you got to learn before you join us up in the stars. You got to get civilized. It's all about that civilizing mission again, which just, again, makes absolutely zero sense. And it's purely meant to be a feel-good story. No one actually gets restorative justice. They're free. But what does that mean? They're still at the behest of these awful, terrible, sentient, spoiler alert, in case you haven't seen the episode. They're just these sentient little brain stems that are different colors. And they're like, oh yeah, we're totally going to honor our agreement and raise and train these people. Like really, it is so weak. And it is so very goddamn white, and that's definitely what's bothering me today.
Well said. Thanks, Bothered Boy. And of course, there's the scene between Chekov and Fluttershy that's the comical, quote-unquote, counterpart to the horrific thing that's happening to Uhura just one cell over. The sexual assault vibes aren't played nearly as hard here, but the implications are there. Sexual assault isn't funny when it happens to men. It's not funny, period. And we can't ignore the fact that Fluttershy is not only, I think, the first woman we've seen on this show who Well, I don't know if I'd go so far as to call her plus-sized, but she's not slender and dainty like most Star Trek ladies. She's muscular and her voice is pitched down in post. I wish I could believe it was a good faith attempt to make her seem more alien or something, but it's hard to see her as anything other than transcoded, especially when Chekov is visibly repulsed by her advances. I'm sure if it were Shahna making moves on him instead, he'd be more receptive. And finally, we're at issues of consent. It's complicated. Very, very complicated. On one hand, Kirk romancing Shahna like this feels kind of icky because she's so naive about matters of love and relationships. She understands procreation on a utilitarian level, but she's practically a child when compared to Kirk's history with relationships. There's a trope for this very thing. It's called, "What is this thing called love?" There's also a video essay by Pop Culture Detective called Born Sexy Yesterday about this same kind of thing, and I'm pretty sure Shahna was an example that he used in that video. In fact, infantilized women being wooed by Kirk is a thing across all 3 episodes penned by Margaret Armen, which we'll see in the future. I almost get the sense that Armen is a Devin Grayson type, a fangirl with a crush on a character who writes these fantasy scenarios where Kirk gets with women who she can project herself onto. Like when Devin Grayson wrote that god-awful Nightwing comic where her self-insert character sexually assaults Dick Grayson. I mean, yeah, I wrote an entire book that was basically just Doc Ock ex-reader fanfic, so maybe I'm a hypocrite, but I just think it's really sad that Armen seems only interested in writing Kirk being interested in baby-fied women. I mean, if that's your kink, cool, but why do you have to make me a part of it? I think Shahna is probably her best written woman, but when the bar is this low, that's not saying much. But then there's the other part of me that wants to defend Kirk and say, no, this was a survival maneuver. The Jim I know wouldn't take advantage of someone like this unless he had to. Because so far, Kirk's never been scummy when it comes to his romance storylines. I still maintain that Kirk is a romantic, not a womanizer. I don't think he sees a woman who's easy to manipulate and thinks to himself, ooh, easy prey here. I really don't. I do think he has genuine affection for Shahna as he realizes that she's a victim of the providers as much as he is. Maybe there's a little bit of trauma bonding here too. My ultimate diagnosis is that Kirk started flirting with Shahna as a means of disarming who he thought was an enemy, but then he realized she wasn't so bad when he started to empathize with her, and he started to have genuine feelings for her. And to the actor's credit, they do have decent chemistry. Still, there is kind of an ick factor here that I just can't get over. I don't think I'll ever be 100% comfortable with this episode, and you know what? That's okay. I'm fine with that. I've said it many times that Star Trek isn't perfect, and this episode doesn't ruin the show for me as a whole. Ironically, it was during the filming of this episode that the cast and crew were told that Star Trek would not be renewed for a 3rd season by NBC. But obviously, that wasn't true for long, as avid fans wrote to the network in droves petitioning NBC to bring the show back. See, even an episode like Gamesters of Triskelion can't kill Star Trek. Big shout out to Bothered Boy for helping me out with this video. You should really go check out his channel. He recently put out a big meaty video about Canadian history, and he's just generally awesome. So yeah, go check out his content. As for me, I'm hoping to have a new video out in the next few weeks, God willing, so subscribe if you're looking forward to that. Thank you as always to my patrons, and I hope you have a very awesome 2024.